Product Backlog Refinement. Refinement stands to the side of the more regularly occurring scheduled repeating events of the Scrum framework. Now, before we get too far into refinement, some of you might be wondering, is product backlog grooming what you're talking about? Yes, I am talking about the same thing. Years ago in the United States, when Scrum was taking off, product backlog grooming was a common term to describe this activity of getting the product backlog refined and ready. But as Scrum became more of a global phenomenon, there were some countries where that term grooming is quite offensive. So it became reasonable to reevaluate the term, and the current thinking on this is product backlog refinement. It's the act of breaking down and further defining product backlog items, making them smaller, more consumable, getting them ready to be brought into the coming sprint or sprints. Product backlog refinement is an ongoing activity to add these details, but you will find it helpful to regularly schedule recurring product backlog refinement sessions. Put them on the calendar. It's very helpful to have that time marked off, reserved. It helps your team if you're the product owner because you don't have to keep interrupting the team haphazardly throughout the sprint with questions or requests for assistance in breaking down an item. You know that you have time on the calendar to do that together. How often would you have one of these refinement sessions? Highly variable, highly variable. For some of you product owners, you can manage through your product backlog with a weekly session of an hour and a half. For others, you're going to need your team to come together an hour or two every day. So there is no limit, but there is a practical impact, of course. My rule of thumb is that once product owners, you start consuming close to 10% of your developers' time in product backlog refinement discussions, it's time to evaluate, hey, what can we do to lessen that burden for the team? Which leads to the question, who should be there? I'm speaking on an assumption that your entire Scrum team participates in product backlog refinement. You certainly could have some refinement sessions that are just with your stakeholders, but at some time, you're going to have the entire Scrum team present. Of course, my Scrum Master is going to assist by facilitating. And of course, my developers are going to be there because they're going to help understand technical feasibility, estimates of effort. But I also want them there for another reason. We know that the product owner is responsible to stay connected with all their primary stakeholders. Now, what I'm about to say is not written down anywhere, but I believe that our Scrum team, from a product owner's perspective, represents a primary stakeholder. It's important for them to be part of the conversation. They're smart, experienced business people. They're going to help understand, hey, what's a good way to break down the work? They're going to come up with new ideas that maybe the product owner hadn't thought of before. And another benefit of this is that by having the team participating, they naturally become invested. Some of the work becomes theirs. There's a sense of ownership of some of the work. And of course, when they move into the sprint and the product owner brings some of those refined product backlog items to work on during that sprint, the rest of the team is already familiar with it. We don't have to spend a whole lot of time going over it again and again. Now, you have other people join product backlog refinement. It doesn't have to be restricted to just your Scrum team. You're going to want to have experts that need to drop in once in a while, provide some advice, but having it on the calendar on a regular basis can be really helpful. Finally, you could theoretically forego a product backlog refinement session and just bring work to the team in the sprint itself. Theoretically, product owner could bring product backlog items that have not been refined. And right there in sprint planning, we will take time to refine it, break it down, understand the impact, the estimate of size, and then continue to plan out the work of the sprint. I do not object to that if you can do that. I worked in an organization once that was so dynamic. The requests were coming in so quickly and changing so quickly that the product owner could barely keep up and could barely have enough time to refine the items. So every sprint planning session, we would spend some time refining product backlog items. But it becomes obvious rather quickly that we would be much more effective if we allocate some time before the coming sprint to get work prepared. Keep in mind also that some of the work that you bring to your team in this refinement session will be new to them. It may generate the need for some research. Well, you don't want to have that question come up in sprint planning. Wouldn't it be better if you could catch that ahead of time, possibly giving your team an opportunity to do a bit of research before the next sprint starts so those priority items could still be brought into the sprint? All of this to say, product backlog refinement is a key point in the entire process. It just doesn't have a formal structure on the calendar of where it fits.